welcome to Game Dev London. I'm Chris Payne, and today we're going to be talking about the merger of Unity with IronSource. My guest today is fellow host Oscar Clark. Hi, Oscar.
Hiya, how you doing? How's things?
Not bad, thank you. Bit hot, I'll admit.
Bit hot. It's like one of the hottest days of the year. I mean, don't worry, it's fine. There's no such thing as climate change. We're not melting.
Yeah.
Although I did take advantage with the barbecue today, so rotisserie chicken all the way.
That's great. So you are an excellent person to talk about this particular merger because of your background. So do you want to tell us a bit about your history with Unity and ad-based monetization?
Cool. So after I left Sony, I worked with a couple of interesting teams as well as consulting. So I worked half my time consulting with a couple of teams, one of which was called Amplifier. Amplifier was working on a thing called Everyplay, so gameplay recording. They also started working on a thing called, it was basically about advertising. So we were doing rewarded video ads. That company got bought by a certain Unity, and those ads became Unity ads, the thing that now supercharged, arguably supercharged the revenue stream of Unity. And obviously everybody loves rewarded ads. I mean, in their defense, I am a big fan. I'm actually a big fan of rewarded ads. I do think rewarded ads are superb. I sat on a fantastic talk with Matt Hall from what are they called? Hipsterwell? Crossy Roads? Anyway, Crossy Road. Anyone, those of you who remember Crossy Road, it's one of the big games that really started to use the joys of rewarded ads. And what we did is I sat there with Matt, and we just talked about game design. And that was the thing that we worked out back in, I must have been 2014, maybe 13. I'm not too sure what year it was. We worked out that actually, rather than this obstructive nightmare that was the forced ad, a rewarded ad was something that players could choose, which would allow us to monetize more people, which, if done well, could foreshadow the value of things to buy. And if it was focused on player value, didn't have to suck. So much so, when we did a survey of people at various conferences, we kept seeing people saying that they were upset if there weren't rewarded ads. Now, obviously, fast forward to today, we've seen some weirdness, some bad acting, the stuff that happens in the world of any commercial offering. And, what I think is really fascinating is that, we see lots of complaints and frustrations, but actually it's become such a significant part of why mobile games have become so powerful in the game space. And actually it's empowered more people to play more games than ever before in history. So I'm a huge fan of rewarded ads. I spent 5.5 years as an evangelist, 4.5 of which were inside Unity. So I was an evangelist for Unity ads. I was the original evangelist for that. And so it was interesting to be part of that journey. Eventually that we moved on, and so I'm sure some of the history of that will come up as we talk. But so I've now got enough distance, because it's been a few years now since I was at Unity. And I should also note that I've known some of the other folks in the industry for a very long time as well. So as somebody who hosts Pocket Gamer events and other shows as well, not just Pocket Gamer, I often am called to be the moderator for talks about advertising, and so there are folks who I'm friends with, Ad Colony, Bungle, things like Imobi, there's a whole bunch of folks I know all over the place. And obviously as a publisher now, I spend a lot of time thinking about how to best use ads in various games. So that's my background and why I have an interest in this particular fight.
Yeah. So I'm generally not a fan of ads in games, but I will say I can acknowledge that the mobile space is 52% of the games industry now.
It's actually slightly more. It's expected by Newzoo to be closer to 60% by the end of the year.
Okay, that's continuing to grow then, and that is largely because I assume that your position would be that is because of the free to play model. Basically, is so accessible to people trying out gaming who don't necessarily know that they like games until they've had a go with a game that gave them zero friction to start playing.
It's a bit more complicated than that, and if you wanted a whole podcast on the why ads work and where, we could spend a few hours talking about that. I will one day do that. I mean, the reason the fundamental reason is that ads in mobile games have zero friction. So what that means is, I see an ad in a game that I like, I go and get that game. I get that game because I want the reward that the ad is offering me as the first piece. So I'm still playing this game, which is why you don't see cannibalization. And then I go and play the other game when I'm done playing this game. And that's the crux of it. That is why rewarded ads in particular have been so effective in mobile. Now, we don't see that in PC because, well, we have issues in terms of the accessibility and the friction involved when we go to a game page on, well, I think you know the stores I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't designed to make it easy. You have to be logged in. You have to be on a PC. You have to blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, I don't have to have any of that, especially on Google. I can just say, oh, I like that, click the button, and it's on my phone. Thank you very much. Job done. And that process is the fundamental bit. There are other things that go with it. For example, the design of the rewards. And if you make them something which foreshadows value, if you make it about player value, great. Obviously, historically, it was about targeting and data as well. That's changed, particularly now with the ICO. So that's the age-appropriate design code, not just Apple's removal of IDFA and the AADC. Yes, we have more acronyms now than ever before. Aren't we excited? Anyway, I'll leave it there. The point is that it's a multi-complex, and I could spend a long time trying to sort of describe why, but it comes essentially down to, it makes it really easy to care about games quickly and to be able to invest in games so that games can be profitable, so the developers can continue to invest.
Right. So in this particular example, Unity and IronSource, I'm aware that IronSource are an established company, like providing a service of putting ads into games. What do IronSource do first up, and how does that compare to Unity ads, which is what Unity had before?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's what do IronSource do? Now, I have to admit, it's been a long time since I checked the full details, but as I understand it, they effectively work as a mediation platform. What a mediation platform basically means is, we make it easy to go one place and get ads from all sorts of places. And so basically, they're all about providing tools for people to basically scale their growth, but also to monetize your game. That means providing appropriate analytics and so on and so forth, so that if you work with them, you can access the best value, the best potential, target the most effectively for your game. Now, like I say, there are lots of these companies. I say lots. There are dozens. I mean, we could be talking about someone like AppLovin or Integral. Again, there are lots that are out there. AdCon work in some similar ways. Even Snapchat has their own ad platform. TikTok has their own ad platform. So, if you're going to use, let's take the fundamental dilemma is, I'm sitting here and it's, what SDK do I put in? That's the fundamental dilemma a game developer's going to do. Mm-hmm. Do I put in Unity ads? Do I put in IronSource? Whatever. The issue is, if I put just one in, there's no guarantee that when a player wants an ad, I'm going to get one, because there has to be someone on the other side wanting eyeballs on that space. Right. So we're providing the supply of eyeballs, or is it demand? I always get, even after working in ads for so many years, I always forget which way around it is. But basically, there are people who need eyeballs and people who supply eyeballs. As a publisher of games, as a game developer, we are supplying eyeballs. And there are people who demand those eyeballs. I think that's the way around it works. Anyway, whatever the language, whichever the way forward it is, there's a mutual relationship with it. If we are going to fill our ads, our fill rate matters.
Right.
Because whatever the price is, and the price is programmatically chargeable at the moment, it's depending on the platform. I think IronSource does programmatic as well. But anyway, you either have... I told you this stuff was complicated. You either have a waterfall price or you have a bidding price. Right. And that is the value for what the individual ad. But unless it's filled, unless it's placed in an appropriate place with the right target audience, the right genre of game, the right eyeball at the end of the day, that ad won't turn up. So the player goes to get their reward and there's nothing to watch.
Right.
Which is no money. In fact, there's no money unless we actually get an install. So in general, we calculate the visibility, or how many people see these ads. Not based on the CPM, so cost per meal. That means 1,000 views. We tend to calculate it based on the cost per cost per install, and that generally has another acronym, eCPM. That's a lovely one for you. And that's estimated cost per meal, which is a weird conversion that companies like Unity Ads, IronSource, and so on and so forth use to try and help people who come from traditional marketing, who are used to cost per eyeball, to convert to cost per install. It's messy and complicated. That's why you often get specialists in it. But the bottom line is there is an amount of money, which is normally something very small, say $4.50 per 1,000 people who actually watch that ad. And then you will get some install. Now, that might have gone down a bit, to be honest, since the IDFA changes. But anyway, you get my drift. It's a complicated mess of people filling ads in a space that's in your game. So if I want to recruit players who look like players like you, I'm going to be spending money to get my ad into your game. If there are other people competing to get that, they're going to be going to the platform and bidding on that. And that's where we end up with the price. That's where we end up with our installs. That's where we get this revenue and user acquisition balance.
Okay, so that makes sense. I don't work in mobile at all, so this is kind of new to me, and kind of terrifyingly intricate. So, what's the difference between why would is the difference between Unity Ads and IronSource just that like IronSource is just sort of like a bigger existing provider of the same service?
Unity Ads is its own platform. So basically, you buy and sell, and Unity Ads supply the ad. With IronSource, multiple platforms plug in to IronSource. So they are mediating between those multiple sources. That's why I choose to implement an IronSource rather than Unity Ads, because I can get... Now, it comes at a price, because obviously the mediator is taking a cut from all of the ads that they can provide, which means that essentially you're getting less percentage, but your chance of having complete 100%
and by going to IronSource, you potentially are accessing a much broader library of advertisers who want to target your players' eyeballs. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, there's a whole bunch of other acronyms I'm not going to try and explain because I'm not sure I fully remember what they all do. But there's DSPs, SSPs, and various others. These are all basically the ecosystem for demand side and supply side, which have to talk to each other to be able to make that all work nicely. Again, it is a mess. There's a fantastic diagram somewhere of all of the different players in all of the different spaces in the chain of an advert getting into a player's hands. It's ridiculous. And of course, everyone's getting a slice of that pie in the process as well.
Yeah.
So advertising is a complex beast, but it is I mean, it's a bit like somebody supplying you from, Sainsbury's. Behind the scenes of Sainsbury's, getting a cabbage from a field to your supermarket at the same way as getting dates or getting dragon fruit or some other weird and exotic vegetable. There's a massive people and players, wholesalers, distributors. It is exactly the same mindset that is going on behind the scenes. If you have to notice there's something wrong.
Much more complicated than I had imagined, certainly.
In fact, actually, weird thing is, I think it was like a year into Unity Ad. Oh, well, actually, no, I think it was just before we got bought. We were already talking about designing our own mediation tools. That never happened, as I remember. But my memory is shot. So it's interesting in some ways that a source provider like Unity Ads buying a mediation partner.
That's an interesting
company,
note. That
really interesting potentially.
Technically, it's a merger rather than a purchase. Which now, again, a little bit outside of my field of expertise. So, what's the significance of these two companies merging rather than one of them purchasing the other?
That's an interesting question, really. I mean, it depends on who ends up, running the board and the texture of the board after the merger. I suspect
the Unity shareholders hold most of the IronSource shares. So I believe effectively Unity ends up in control.
Which means it's essentially a difference without.
It's a difference in name only.
What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, it's an argument without a difference. Yeah, I mean, I went in. Look, I suppose the point is that it's obviously such a significant kind of combination factor. It's not like when Unity bought, say, Chili Connect. It was a relatively straightforward. Here's some tech, done. I think that there will be a number of changes that result inside of the ecology of Unity's ad team. I wouldn't be surprised now. It's an interesting one because it's obviously changed a lot since I was there. And I have to admit, when there was a change of management there, that didn't go so well for me. I did not fit with the new management that came in after UC moved on to another project. So I went to that other project very quickly. I have to admit, I wasn't a big fan of the new management. Well, let's put it that way. But I mean, it's up to people to judge for themselves based on their experience with that team. Unity Ads is still an effective tool. I think IronSource is still an effective tool. The question is, does having a ad provider like Unity Ads as the essential owner of the mediation platform, does that make it more difficult for other ad platforms to work with that mediation platform or not? I don't know. And it's probably down to the fact that I haven't been as involved in the scene. But it's an interesting question. I think.
So the other thing that came out of this particular news story was a quote from John Riccitello about this process, which is what has made a number of game developers not a fan of the current management. So I'm just going to read it for clarity, but let's see. John Riccitello was talking about the necessity of getting monetization working effectively in games, and his quote was that Ferrari and some of the other high-end car manufacturers still use clay and carving knives. It's a very small portion of the gaming industry that works that way, and some of these people are my favourite people in the world to fight with. They're the most beautiful and pure, brilliant people. they're also some of the biggest fucking idiots. Guaranteed to make all game developers love
So,
him.
yeah, I think the phrase "tone deaf" comes to mind. But we've got to remember that the way I used to think about it is essentially when John Riccitello took over, he's a shark. He's a known shark. He's an EA shark. We know he's a shark. He's going to do shark things, and Unity needed a shark. That shark would be what would take that company into the IPO stage. It needed that process. In my opinion, I think that's entirely fine. But he's still a shark. And I don't mean this in a bad way. I mean, what it means is he is not going to particularly care about every single individual's perspective on his choices of action. And that's fine if you understand that and you accept that. I can see why he said what he said, but it is the most tone-deaf thing I can imagine. There are individual game developers out there who still think that monetization is evil and should be demonized, and the people who put monetization in the games should be burnt at the stake. There are people who have basically treated me like that. Just because I think that we should be able to make money for our art. I think we are commercial game developers. I have no shame charging for my game. I have no shame creating free-to-play experiences. Doesn't mean I think somebody who doesn't want to make a free-to-play game is a fucking idiot. I might get frustrated by them sometimes when their logic doesn't work, and I try to help. But the bottom line is actually what's going on here is a difference of criteria of success.
Yeah.
And we can't ignore that. We can't ignore that. For some people, success is pure status, not commercial return. And actually, we need to accept that a bit more, I think. And that, I think, is the problem with JR's comment. Is he's not looking at other people's forms of success. He's only looking at the one that he values, which is how much is on the bottom line.
That seems fair. Do you think that it will affect Unity's bottom line if comments like that alienate the portion of Unity's customers who use it to make traditional premium games, or possibly just experimental experiences? A lot of people use Unity to just make free games for fun and artistic expression. Yeah.
Which is great. This is the point. This is what I loved when I was an evangelist at Unity. I could embrace. In fact, I had huge freedom. I was encouraged to go out and explain why this stuff was great. And the fact that because I was reporting in somebody who understood where I was coming from, what I was trying to do was paint a picture. And I'm not talking about just me here, by the way. I mean, it's using me because I can say that without putting anyone else into trouble and make anyone feel bad. There are an amazing array of evangelists I work with, and they were fantastic people who had passion and delight for game development in general. But my experience of that was I got to go all around the world and talk to all sorts of developers about every stage of game development. And I try to sort of look at game development as a pipeline from the hobbyist, fun, people who are learning, to the hard-nosed commercial people. The thing I was always trying to focus on, and I think which was at the heart of that Unity spirit of the time, was making games that people love, putting player value first. And understanding that putting player value first is actually a commercial decision. Unfortunately, we've had an era of bad actors, of accountants doing monetization jobs that aren't paying attention to the human effect, I would argue. And then when you see the backlash that happens as a direct consequence of that, whether it's someone putting false ads, bait and switch ads onto a Unity Pro, so Unity has had, not just Unity, all of the ad companies had these Evany or whatever they're called, bait and switch ads, which showed you a game that was not the game. and I wanted to play that game. In fact, I did download and play that game. Turned out not to be so much fun, but never mind. But they showed me a game that was different. But they got me to that page, and enough people chose to play, and they were commercialized so quickly. It was fine for the commercial
created this
girls, whatever. But it created a very unfortunate sentiment, a sour taste in the mouth for everybody. Right. It spoiled them. So basically, it poisoned the well.
Yes. So
I think there is the problem.
Although I don't work in mobile, I play mobile games. I still favour premium games because I am a gamer and I am willing to pay for an experience.
So you preferred
I've not played
Nukem Forever, a premium game that was it was so terrible. Oh my god, it was so terrible. Like 40 quid for an awful, terrible attempt.
Yes.
So badly done. I'm making a silly point. There's nothing intrinsic of paying up front that makes the game better. But you are used to having, or prefer perhaps, a formula where you see a price, you know the rough estimate of what that price says about the product and the team that made that product, and you trust the brand that produced it to make a game of it. Totally get that. A lot of games, one-off lovely bits of joy, fantastic, that works great. But for long-term retention games, that's a very hard model to deal with, because we're constantly updating, and if the game team hasn't got a way of being able to continue to reinvest, they can't sustain
if the game needs to be constantly maintained, then the game needs to constantly make money from the users, even if there aren't new users entering the ecosystem. So
and it doesn't mean we have to create these kind of crazy loot box systems which are more like gambling. I don't have a problem with loot boxes, actually. I have a problem with bad loot boxes. I have a problem with having things which are randomized. I have a problem where things that should be included in the game are deliberately put into bad odds in order to misinform players.
I think, as with everything,
and I think that's really the crux of all this.
There are ethical ways to do it, and there are exploitative ways to do it. I'm playing a word game on mobile at the moment, which is free to play, heavy on the microtransactions, and it has, it has. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the phrase that you used. It has opt-in ads where if I run out of currency, I can watch an ad to get a little top-up of currency.
Rewarded.
And I will admit I have used that a couple of times. But I have resisted.
And that's all it takes. If you have 10 million people playing a game, and 1,000 of them, or 10, million of them are watching 1-2 ads a week. That's actually
so if you have enough users, then that can scale, because you're only working on the one game, no matter how many people are using it. So that kind of works. I mean, there are obviously there's a lot of different monetization models around, but obviously the premium. I do understand that the premium model that I'm used to from growing up in the 80s and 90s is difficult, because it requires people to know what they are getting from a particular game before, and shell out the money before they have any of the experience.
And there are really good reasons why that worked when it was a physical product. It was a really smart thing at the point where it was a physical object I would go buy, and it would then install and play. Now, we might even still buy a physical product, but it's actually not really the thing we're buying, because we're going to have 180 gig download the second we put it in, So we might as well just download it in the first place, because the Blu-ray probably wasn't even that big in terms of what the content was on the disc. And that is actually that annoys me for lots of other reasons, because it's bad data management. Not always, but quite a lot of the time. The fundamental thing is that we've got we're used to the chucking in the 50p's or whatever it was, the pound coins into the gauntlet machine, which I remember in, oh goodness me, that would have been 88 or 87, I think. 87, I think it was. I was in Butlins, spent an entire day, a literal day, playing gauntlet with 4 people. We actually swapped in and out others to make sure that we could do things like eat and do breaks. And the only reason we could afford it is because all of the Butlins guests just kept chucking pound coins at us. It was ridiculously fun, a magical moment. I do not want to know how much money was put into that machine, because every 2 minutes you're putting in more money.
Monetization is not that's a fair point, though. That monetization, anyway, that sort of
that was a commercial model,
or kind of like gouging the player for more cash every time they die and need to continue. It's not a new thing. It's been around since the original arcades.
No. So the very essence of the games that we started playing, well, especially me, because I'm freaking old.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to get to another thing as well. Just another comparison, because I think there's some really interesting subtleties that come out when you actually look at some of this stuff in detail.
Yes.
For example, look at hyper-casual games. Now, absolutely the worst thing possible. I am not going to want to watch an ad every 3 seconds. Oh my God. Except it turns out the way that game plays, if you look at the psychology of what people are actually doing, you have the intensity of play. The ad is a break. So I'm then ready to do. So we're actually fitting ads into the flow. It's actually saying we have a flow model. So there's a particularly weird thing, which if you'd have done that volume of ads in any casual game, you'd have lost everybody. I've literally had that happen to me. A client of mine, when I was consulting, put ads every single place. I told him, don't do it. You want these choices of places to use, but don't do all of them all of the time. And he did all of them all the time. He completely lost every piece of every play he could possibly have. However, we now see other casual games where people are deliberately doing that, and it works. And it's because of the intensity and the simplicity and the ease of play and the knowledge that they do not have a 7-day life cycle. Therefore, any volume of ads.
What do you mean? So just backing up a little bit there. So can you clarify what you mean by a 7-day life cycle for a non-mobile dev?
Okay, so when you're looking at games, particularly free-to-play games, you're looking at what is their their shelf life of the player, essentially. What's the life cycle of the player? So typically, I would be looking at 40-day retention day 1. I'd be looking at 40%. Yeah. Sorry, I can't even talk properly. 40% day 1 retention. I'd be looking at 20% day 7, and I'd be looking at 10% day 30. Now, actually, that's not quite true anymore. It's more 35, 15, and 8. Maybe 5, depending on the game. A hyper-casual game will typically be 60% day 1 retention, 15% day 7.
So they are expecting players to basically. So they're expecting players to binge the game for a few days because it's the new thing, and then as the novelty wears off, they will move on, and new players will come in instead. That's
get the next one. Yeah. Now, if you think about that 48, 72-hour window, let's say they watch 20 ads per session. Let's say they do 4 sessions per day. So we're talking about,
that's a lot of ads.
80 ads a day for 3 days.
And then if you multiply that up by millions of users,
potentially, Now, I'm not entirely serious. Yeah, not entirely serious, but that's not completely preposterous an idea. It's quite heavy. I mean, even for the hyper-casual world. But that's the sort of maths I'd be thinking about. Because if you think about it, ads are based on the number of views that lead to an install. And typically, you can estimate the number of views that will lead to an install. That's what ECPM is all about, that acronym I used earlier. So if I know that for every 1,000 views I'm getting £4.50, I can either get those 1,000 views from 1,000 people, what you're viewing once, or maybe I can get it from 100 people viewing 10
Right.
times, or 50 people
Yeah.
viewing 20 times.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, it's not quite that simple
But
an
at the end of the
equation for
day,
obvious reasons,
you
but you get my
I
drift.
guess the balance with ad-based monetization is that you want to get the maximum ad views per player, but you've got to balance that with if you're too aggressive with it, or the ads don't fit into the player's flow state, then it's going to put them off the game and they will stop watching it, and then you've got no revenue at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then people just turn their phone upside down when the
I've got
ad
to
is
admit, I do
playing,
that.
and they wait till it finishes, and then they pick it up and
Yeah.
play again. Yeah, people do that all the time. And why? Because the setup of the ad has been
Right.
overly egged, and we don't have the anticipation of the reward. So if you're going to get coins, no one cares. No one cares about coins. They care about the
Right.
thing that coins can buy, what the coins can enable. So if we're going to be better, more effective at getting people to actually watch the ad because we need them to watch the ad
Yeah.
to install the game, or we get nothing, you've got to make them get benefit from actually bothering to watch the ad. So if you get that ecosystem wrong, we will normally watch an ad and check it out just because of novelty. When we start seeing repeat ads, that becomes problematic. That's where having a single source supply can be really effective. So that's where one of my main reasons for pushing Unity ads to people as their sole provider was that the platform could learn. Now that's less the case now. Well, I would expect. I don't know it's less the case, but because of IDFA going, because of privacy changes, because of the need for anonymity due to GDPR and the age appropriate design code,
you're not allowed to
have to be
capture too much
super
information
careful
about the viewer. Yeah.
But that prevents, yes, which means that the algorithms cannot be as clever as they once were, which means we see fewer relevant ads than we would have done. So, ironically, the lack of, the privacy controls have meant that we will get worse ads, which is the way it goes, and that's fine. I mean, the fact that that data doesn't actually most people don't care about the actual person, although there was a trend before GDPR. In fact, you still see it now, where I will see ads for things I was looking at on Amazon 5 minutes before, and it creepily turns up in a games page I didn't want to see it on. I just rejected that thing, so I don't want it anyway because I chose not to buy it. And yet it still shows it to me in case I might change my mind. But I'm not. I just feel creeped out. And that's the difficulty, is that we see from a data point of view, it's effective for some people, but the toxicity of it leaves a poison somewhere. So this is back to this balancing. So ads is an incredibly complex space and incredibly interesting. And actually, there's some great stuff going on in terms of non-mobile stuff. And I'm an advisor for Audio Mob for Full Awareness, so that we're now seeing some interesting audio uses. So you don't interrupt your play, but you have to listen to the ad. I'm also a big fan of some of the in-world ads. So people like Adinmo, Abati, a few others out there that do this, where they're putting a real-world banner ad into a game. Obviously, the most perfect use of that is racing games, where the actual looks in context. But there've been a few attempts to be smart about how you might say, for example, add a sepia tone effect to an ad, so you could place that brand ad in a world that is like medieval-esque, Harry Potter-like, essentially. Not that I want to talk about the author of that for various reasons. I'm not going to go into. Anyway, point being of all of this stuff is that smart use of ads, it's respectful of players, where there's an common understanding that we are trying to find ways to make money so that we can continue making the great game that you love, so that we are focused on player value, will in the end be a better experience. But there are people out there with short-term expectations, and they poison the world, both from the point of view that they saturate people's view of ads,
So,
but also because they take them
given
in
Riccitello's comments, do you think that betrays a bias towards monetization at the cost of the player experience?
Well, that I personally suspect it's a poor choice of words to talk about a frustration I do understand. The frustration I do understand, is when you talk to really creative, amazing game developers who have an antithesis to monetization, they can be unwilling to look at why monetization works. So much so they can almost be zealots about it. I'm often in a room where I'm dealing with that, and there are some people I'm sure would think I'm a zealot for monetization. That's probably not completely unfair. But for me, the difference is when I'm trying to talk to a developer, I want to know one thing first. Why are you making the game? And I'm going to ask you that question 5 times. I don't want to accept the first answer. I want to keep understanding and understanding and understanding and understanding. And mostly when I talk to people, it's because they want to make something they're proud of, and they want to be able to make the next game. That essentially are the 2 things that come up most commonly. You want people to respect what you made. You want to be able to make the next game. In order to do that, we have to have some level of commerciality. And that's just fact, because we aren't living in the same space as maybe art, where you will often find rich patrons willing to hand over cash just so that you can express yourself. We don't have that. We don't have a fantastic pipeline that allows there to be seed funds. I mean, there's some interesting stuff that Creative England are playing with. Chris Phillips is doing, I think, a good job there trying to push that off. And we've got UK Gamer Fund. But look, the difference. How much money was given away to the creative industry, of which, how much went to film versus games? I can't remember the actual number off the top of my head, but it was a fraction of the amount. Despite the fact that games is bigger than movies, it's bigger than home entertainment, other ones have done, bigger than music. And during the pandemic, it was combined, all of those things. We are the single largest form of digital entertainment on the planet. And yet we are given the leftovers from government.
That's
now,
potentially a whole other podcast. But I mean, obviously, there is. It's largely. I would say that.
Not that I'm going to have views
because of the fact that it's such a young industry that the entire industry is younger than most politicians. So.
Oh, totally. I mean, I'm 53 and I've been in the games industry for 24 years. I've been trying to be in the games industry since I was 18 when I made my first pitch. So, I failed my first. Oh, actually, no, my first pitch went great. They said, fantastic, build it and then come back when you made it. And I couldn't afford to do that, but that's life. But that again, it emphasizes my point, is that we have, by necessity, because we are in the new industry, like you rightly say, we haven't by necessity had to be more commercially minded than some other industries. Film and music and TV have interesting mechanisms that allow that, have made that possible, particularly how the production of short films gets funded, particularly around the way things like there were interesting schemes put together for the SEIS process, which backfired quite badly and nearly affected the games industry as well. But let's leave all that aside. We don't have patrons. We don't have grants for people who want to see games happen just because they want to invest in individual developers or the progress of new talent.
I wonder if
and that's a shame.
I think to a certain extent the fact that because it's a young industry that has ballooned very rapidly, coupled with the fact that we've therefore had to monetize quite heavily, so which is why we have quite high costs for buying games compared to a movie or something. I would argue that possibly the fact that we've had to like monetize quite aggressively is what has perhaps contributed to people not rating games as a cultural medium, because they look at free to play games and it seems overly commercialized to someone who's not familiar with it.
Yeah. I think it depends on the game. I think there are some really good examples of free-to-play games where it just makes sense. You know, I mean, if you think about a lot of the card-based games, buying packs of cards or buying a battle pass, there's something particularly intrinsically bad. I mean, I'm a massive fan of battle pass mechanism. The reason is that a battle pass is designed that you get more if you play more, and you can play, you can spend. Those who play get something. Those who spend get more. And if you missed out on something, you can do a microtransaction to buy the thing you missed out on. That kind of mindset, I think no one has any, well, very few people have a huge issue with, especially if it's done with the player value in mind. But where you're nickel and diming people continuously trying to get an extra pound out of here, trying to play with economies of scale, it can get a bit painful. Like if you know, it's a bit more like gambling. It feels a bit more like gambling. When it's not, absolute games are not gambling. Loot box are not gambling, in my opinion, and I'm not just saying that. I actually spent a lot of time researching this, looking at the psychological evidence, particularly around behavioural addiction. Unfortunately, the DSM-6 introduced a, I think, poorly defined context of game dependency, which essentially tried to define a behavioral addiction in a way that a lot of psychologists are very unhappy about, and I think is still being debated. But again, I did a talk on this in, I think it's 2015 at GDC on the advocacy track, so I think it's in the GDC vault. My worst and best rated talk ever. I had all 5s and 1s, so I ended up with a 3.5 because literally split down the middle. People who hated me because I didn't attack free to play and I didn't defend free to play simultaneously. Anyway, I won't bore you with the details.
Yeah.
Why am I going on about this? Because let's go back to John Riccitello. Let's go back to IronSource. What we're talking about is a complex space. That complex space requires complex delivery, and mediation is a key part of that mix. Now, if you look at the current situation, the big players are still Google and still Facebook, and will continue to be. Now, Facebook is, I think, slightly declining as a result of the fallout effect of the privacy process, but I still think they're an important part of the factor. I think they're also less effective than they have been because effectively the audience isn't as likely to be there as it is on other platforms. That being said, do not underestimate Facebook's potential. It's amazing for testing because we can spend tiny amounts of money really effectively, really targetedly, and understand if anyone cares about our game. So I will always thoroughly recommend people to use Facebook for that, even if it's not going to be how you're going to scale your game later, although practically it probably is. I actually not have found a lot of luck with Google in terms of testing because you have to spend slightly more than you would on Facebook. I find the results being slightly more spongy. But the bottom line of all of this is this whole changing climate and environment means that we have to use multiple sources of ads and multiple providers. So we need more mediation. Therefore, it makes sense for someone like Unity to come along and say, I'm going to grab that. And equally, it makes sense for IronSource to say, hang on a minute, we have a pool of developers. If you can simplify the integration process with the mediation platform, that's a massive advantage. Do not underestimate the benefits of being close. Now, if we start looking at the fundamental things that all advertisers are going to have to do better at, We're going to have to focus on interest groups. We're going to have to focus on creative. We're actually going to have to get better at making more interesting ads, because we can't just point an ad at somebody because we know. We have to start being a bit smarter and actually use a lot more techniques from branding. And branding is getting more important. The big spenders cannot get the value that we can get as a game developer, because we can go and find a person playing a game like our game right now and immediately give them a button to go and install that game. If it's Coca-Cola, they can't go and find someone who's currently desperate for a brown caffeine-based cold beverage,
which is why
and immediately
Coca-Cola
put
have
it
to
in
use
their
billboards
hands.
and
So they have
shop
used other
windows
techniques.
and so forth. Yeah,
Precisely. But they're starting to realize, where is their audience? Their audience is not on TV. Put it this way, right? There are more people watching video game related material on YouTube and various other platforms, Twitch, etc., than the combination of Netflix, of HBO, Prime, and various other platforms. I've forgotten the full list. There's some great stats out there. Don't trust me. Look at the stats. But basically, more video game content is being viewed than TV home content stuff. So if you're going to promote your game, if you're going to promote your brand, if you're going to promote your soft drink, you're going to be spending that money where people are and where they're likely to be receptive. If you make it so there's a fantastic reward, why not make an amazing Coke-based skin that you actually care about, Coca-Cola? Make it so I want to be part of your brand. How else can you do that in any other medium? In games, we do. We don't just watch something, we do. And you can engage in amazing ways. So we've done fantastic stuff when I was working on PlayStation Home. People like Red Bull. Red Bull are amazing innovators. Same with Audi. Audi did a fantastic job. They had an Iron Man. They had the Iron Man license when Iron Man film came out, so they replaced the car in this crazy kind of Micro Machine style game.
Yeah,
it wasn't really. I can't remember the actual definition of it, but anyway, it was a fun, silly game.
Yeah,
and they replaced the car with Iron Man because they could. So you immediately associated you in the Audi space. You were at Iron Man. You could see the resonance between the brand and even things like Diesel clothing, where I could actually buy Diesel clothing for my character, which was the next season's Diesel clothing. I could actually try that out on who I was and identify myself. Then I could dress like I was in the game. Again, I know I'm going on about something which died like 12 years ago, but my point is, we're now hearing lots of people talk about metaverses. We're now seeing, real upheaval in advertising space. Massive upheaval because of privacy, and rightly so. Massive change, and actually an increasing understanding that we have to think more like traditional marketeers and leverage brand as well as targeting, as well as data. So if you are living in that space, if you are an IronSource, if you're a Unity Ads, you are going to have to adapt. You know it's coming. How can you get a competitive advantage in that space? Well, why not dance together?
Makes a lot of sense why they would merge.
But you can also see why you then see the frustration if you're someone like JR, trying to encourage people to go down this route, for rightly or wrongly, but when he then turns his frustration at the very people who are the developers that loved Unity once upon a time, then that's not good. That's not a good plan. But we haven't, it's been a while since we had a Gerald Ratner moment. If anyone wants to look that up, you'll know what I mean very quickly. Just go look up Gerald Ratner. I don't think this is a Gerald Ratner moment, by the way. I just think it's an open door for Epic to just continue what they've been doing ever since they started the Epic Mega Grants. And I think they've been showing a lot of positivity to game developers at every level recently. So kudos to those guys.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up there because we're coming up for an hour. Even though there's still kind of stuff to dig into, but
Oh, there's so much I could talk about, and as you know, I'll leave it to
fantastic.
my
Thank you
podcast
so
when
much
I
for joining
get
me,
back to
Oscar.
that.
So yeah, if you've enjoyed listening to this discussion, then please pop along to gamedev.london, where you can find links to our Discord community and to our podcasts, which are on podcast service of your choice and YouTube and such like. Until next week, I've been Chris Payne. Thanks very much.